I'm CM Coleman, and welcome to CM Coleman Home. Today, we're going to be looking at part 2 of our budgeting series. And on this Money Monday, we're looking at tracking part 2. So what this is last week, I asked you to do some tracking. That meant you tracked all of the money that you had coming in and all the money that you had going out, which probably looks something like this. And you're now saying to yourself, well, what am I going to do with this information? Well, I'm going to tell you what you're going to do with this information. Let's look at it really closely. If you look at the information closely, you can see that I had a paycheck of $768, which is cool. That's great. Then I'm using an aggressive savings idea. My idea behind this comes from a lot of financial institutions which are wanting you to do a 50-30-20. 50-30-20 says that you have 50% of your money coming in goes to living expenses. 30% of your money goes to your housing and those sort of expenses, and 20% should go to savings. That's a very aggressive savings policy. However, the reason for that is you probably need 9 months of your income in a savings account for just in case of an emergency, because there are statistics that say, and I do believe it's the labor union statistics, which say that that the average person is out of work for 27 weeks, or about 9 months. So you would need 9 months of savings to carry you over. So I went for a really, really heavy savings. But now you're looking at this going, well, it's just a bunch of numbers. What can I do with it? Well, what you do with those numbers are, let's put it into categories, sort of like this. The categories make it a little bit easier. If we look at our categories, I've divided mine so that I have my rent, and then the utilities, which should be about 30%, and this one's actually about, I think, 41%. Then I have my bills, which include my phone, and also don't forget to pay down any debt that you have, so you want to pay down those debts. Then I have my food expenses, and then dining out, entertainment, savings, and gasoline for the car. Now, that leaves me a grand whopping total of, I think, $2.85 to play around with. What do we do with all of this? Well, because this is just a generic kind of tracking, I don't have any details so that I can say to myself, well, what did I buy in groceries that I did or did not need? Are there ways that I can actually cut down on things? Because if you look at it, my gas, electric, and water are kind of, you're saying, well, how is it possible that there's 25, 40, and then you say, I have to remind you that this is for every 2 weeks. So realistically, the rent would be $400, the gas would be $50, and the electric would be $80, and the water would be $60. Are those high? Yes, those are high. The reason that they're that high is because that way, if anything happens, I do have a cushion there. You notice I'm not using my savings as my cushion. I'm using my actual budgeting of those items as the cushion, which makes it easier. So that way I'm not touching the savings. Do I need to spend $218? It'd be like $220 for groceries? No. And what's funny about that is probably in these groceries, because I just have them listed as where I got them, there are other things in there like clothing, that sort of thing, but it's listed all in groceries because that's where I got them. The more detailed that I go, the better it will be. So when you start thinking about a budget and you start thinking about tracking, you're going to have to start thinking in details. Your tracking really does need to be as detailed as possible. So break down your categories, and with my categories I went for rent, utilities, bills, groceries, dining out, entertainment, savings, and car. Your categories might be different. So we want you to keep track of these things. We want you to have a really aggressive, and I mean aggressive, savings account. But you notice I had entertainment in there, because if you don't allow for entertainment, you're going to feel deprived. I don't want you to feel deprived. I want you to have some fun. But we're going to look at, later on, we're going to look at where we can cut down on some expenses and where we can build in some savings into each of those groups. Because A budget is just that. A budget is an estimate of how much money you're going to spend per month or per year on a certain item. The goal is to spend less of that. That seems really simple and it seems like something that everybody would be able to do, but it can be hard if you don't have the information. The reason I wanted you to track first is because that gives you the information that you need. The more tracking you can do, the more you can see, well, hey, I've put too much money into, let's say my gas bills are actually only $30 a month. I've allotted for $50 a month. I can take that money and put it elsewhere, which would then give me more money to play around with in other things, like entertainment, say. Or maybe I'm going to find out that the $218 or $220 that I spent in groceries isn't really real, because maybe since this is the holiday time, I've done other things like buy for Christmas gifts, that sort of thing. So you have to adjust this. You might consider having a category which is for gifts. That way you can have money taken out for that, so that you can then won't have to have a sudden big expense. Some things to look at is, what expenses do you know that you have every 3 months, every 4 months, every 6 months, say like car insurance or those sort of things that you need to have in this budget. Remember, this is only a 2-week budget, but this is only 2 weeks of tracking, but this is what we're looking at. I want to have more than $2.85 left over after a pay. And this is, like I said, this is saying that I made $12 an hour and worked 40 hours a week, which is 80 hours, which then I brought home $768. So does that make sense? Does that help you just a little bit? So once again, right now, all we're looking at, like I said, this is tracking part 2. We are looking at how much we spent, how much we had coming in, and dividing it out into categories. Once we have those categories, we can then do estimates on how much we're going to spend each month, and then keep track of it. That's what's really important about all of this. Don't just do it and then not keep track of it. You need to keep track and keep detailed track. The more detailed, the better you'll be, and you'll be able to come up with categories that I don't even have listed on there, because you might have some under entertainment, you might have a movie service that you belong to, you might have websites that you belong to, which need to show up in your budget. And they need to show up on your tracking, and they will as you go along. If you know all those things, you can plot them in there and put them into the different spaces. If you have questions on this, we're going to come back and do a lot more. In fact, next week, we're going to not only just look at the budgeting and tracking, we're going to look at more details, where we can get some of the extra money, and how I figured out what to allot for overages. Because I'm one of these people, in the wintertime when I get cold, I want to be able to turn up my heat. I'll be honest, I don't want to freeze. So I like to put in some extra money in there, so that way I can have the ability to turn up heat without feeling guilty. Also, you're saying to yourself, but how do you pay these things every 2 weeks? Well, you can ask a lot of the places that you owe money to, or that their expenses, if you can pay it every 2 weeks. And some places will just let you do it every 2 weeks. For me, it made it really easy, simply because I could then pay it every 2 weeks. That's when I get paid, every 2 weeks. It's not one big lump sum, and I can trick myself into believing that, hey, this is easier, a lot easier. Well, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions, put them in the comment below. Remember to click like or favorite this, share it on social media, see if it helps other people, because there are a lot of people who have tons and tons of questions on budgeting. And we're going to go very much more into detail about this, but I want to keep these short, sweet, and to the point. So next week we're going to go a little bit more into each category. Don't forget to check out my other channels. So I also have a daily vlog, which we'll talk about everything which is going on in my life for the day, and sometimes things which are going on in the world. Also, if you're interested, you can do the fan funding, which helps support this page. It helps support this videos, and it helps me get the money to make things like all those delicious recipes that you see coming to you every week. And also, hopefully, we'll be able to go into more places and talk to more people as we get more funding for this. I hope you like this. Don't forget, click like and favorite, and I will see you again next week. Make yourself at home.